Nora, I've changed my mind. I'm not giving you a ride. I'm heading out now, so you can walk home. It should only take you 3 hours to get there, easy, right? Tom, I just came back from giving birth at my hometown. What do you mean by leaving me behind? So what if you've just given birth? Having kids is a wife's duty. It's just the norm. When I say walk, you walk. With a devilish grin, Tom spat out those words. When he says he's changed his mind, it's a lie. He must have intended to harass me from the start. Having kids is a wife's duty. It's just the norm. To say such things so casually, my husband is truly a scumbag. But I already knew my husband was scum. In fact, I knew everything. Keeping my anger to myself, I calmly told him. Fine, Tom. I'll walk. But just one question before I go. Where did you think you were sending me? It won't take 3 hours from here to home. Where did I think? Obviously, home. It's a 3-hour walk to our house. Can't you even figure that out? Housewives are really dumb, huh? Dumb? That would be you, Tom. I've already moved to a new place. It's just a 5-minute walk from here. It's definitely not gonna take 3 hours. Get it now? You moved? Liar. Talking to you is just a waste of time. Well, I'm leaving now, so walk home. Oblivious to everything, Tom sneered and started the car. Smirking and looking amused, he closed the window that had been open. That smile of his wouldn't last much longer. Because you're finished. Suddenly, a man's arm reached through the gap of the open car window and grabbed Tom by the chest. Tom was surprised and struggled, but the sheer strength of the arm overwhelmed him. He flailed and tried to break free, but to no avail. Watching this, I remained utterly calm. Let go. I don't know who you are, but you're gonna regret this. My brother is a cop. I'll call him right now. Don't think you can get away with this. From inside the car, the man's face couldn't be seen. Without even knowing who it was, Tom continued to spout threats. But the moment the man showed his face to Tom, everything changed. Hey Tom. It's your cop brother. The man holding Tom's chest was his brother, Ryan. Realizing this, Tom visibly started to panic. Why is Big Bro here? We haven't heard from you in years. It's been a while. Now, you're coming with me. What kind of joke is this after such a long time? I don't understand. I have things to do right now. Just get to the point. No way, you're definitely coming. We'll continue this at Nora's new place. Nora's new place? What are you even saying, bro? And Nora, did you call him? You know what's gonna happen later, right? Tom was furious and yelled at me, but he quickly calmed down. When Ryan dragged him out of the car and glared at him. Tom is a sturdy 6 feet tall, but Ryan towers over him at 6 feet 5 inches, with a muscular build. Even Tom looked small compared to him. Passers-by chose to ignore the scene, as Ryan seemed like an overwhelmingly intimidating presence. Oh, big bro, calm down. What are you saying I did? You're not saying you've fallen for Nora, are you? She's a wonderful woman, indeed, Tom. Just come with us. When I say walk, you walk. The same words he had said to me, Ryan now threw back at Tom, who seemed resigned and started walking. As I had said, it was just a 5-minute walk, and my new apartment was right around the block. Even my skeptical husband finally believed when he saw the apartment building in front of him. At that moment, seeing his face, he seemed to realize something, as he started sweating and his eyes darted around nervously. As we passed the parking lot and headed towards the elevator, Tom suddenly threw a question at me. Damn, this makes no sense, why was Big Bro here in the first place? Nora asked me. She wanted me to come without you knowing. I was watching from behind the scenes the whole time. Tom, were you really gonna leave Nora behind just after she had given birth? Do you even know how tough postpartum is? What was with that attitude towards your wife? Well, that was. I had a sudden matter to attend to and panicked. I just spoke too harshly. Look, I'm stressed from work and didn't mean any harm. And Nora, why did you call Big Bro? Sneaking around behind my back. While Tom was grumbling, it was clear who was really sneaking around. I knew everything. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gone to such lengths. And Tom is clueless. He doesn't realize he's already one step into hell. Tom, don't play dumb. You know why I called Ryan, don't you? What are you talking about? If I knew, I wouldn't be asking. Just cut it out. You're the one who needs to cut it out. She lives in this apartment building, doesn't she? Your mistress. At those words, Tom's eyes widened, and he looked back and forth between me and Ryan. Yes, Tom was cheating. Even though I had just returned from giving birth to twins, he had been deceiving me all along. Of course, Ryan knew about Tom's infidelity too. Standing next to me, Ryan looked at Tom with utter disdain. Naturally, Tom began to deny his affair. What, a mistress? What are you talking about? It's my first time here today. Stop making strange accusations without proof. Don't tell me, you took what Nora said seriously? Come on, you're a cop. No proof, huh? I didn't want to believe it either. That my only brother could betray his family like this. Nora, why don't you show him the reality? Yes, indeed. Saying this, I pulled out a tablet from my bag and pointed the screen towards Tom. Immediately after, Tom stared at the screen, trembling, and became more upset than I had ever seen. It can't be, why does Nora have this? As the shock set in, Tom's breathing became more and more labored. The tablet displayed evidence of Tom's affair. The woman's face wasn't visible on camera, but the scene of them getting together right after she gave birth was clearly captured. Tom was so caught up in his affair that he didn't notice the camera. He's the one making bizarre accusations. And he's making excuses without even realizing I have solid proof. Clearly, he looks down on me. He must think I'm just a dumb woman who can't do anything. As Tom trembled in shock, I calmly explained the situation to him. Tom, I know you're busy with work. That's why I was prepared. I bought a baby monitor. I'm busy with housework and telecommuting too, so I got it just in case. And then it recorded something unbelievable. Do you understand now? A baby monitor. You never mentioned that to me. Don't go doing things on your own. Never mentioned it? You mean you weren't listening? Your attitude changed suddenly as soon as I got pregnant. You started using work as an excuse not to come home. We've talked about it many times, but you always brushed it off. And even if I hadn't mentioned it, you should have noticed the baby monitor's existence. It's your own fault for being too absorbed in your affair. Tom's harassment of me didn't start yesterday. As I said earlier, he began to harass me suddenly when I got pregnant. Initially, I was just confused because I couldn't understand why. Could it be that I was unknowingly making him unhappy? Was I not supporting my busy husband enough? I was frustrated with all these thoughts. But the moment the affair was revealed by the baby monitor, I realized I was wrong. Once I had the children, I was just disposable to him. I was nothing more than a tool to be used. When I realized this, I felt something dark and viscous rising from the depths of my stomach. It was the first time I had ever felt this way in my life. After that, I decided to take revenge on my husband and confided everything to Ryan. It's truly unbelievable. To discover my husband's affair through a camera I bought to watch over our child. Tom, don't think you're getting off scot-free. I'm utterly disappointed in you. After getting Nora pregnant, you harass her and cheat, and then you just make excuses. We know all about the foolish things you've been doing. It's too late to undo it, but the least you can do right now is apologize to Nora. Ryan spoke to Tom with a look of disappointment, his voice advising rather than just angry. From his demeanor, it was clear he was more than just angry. Tom and Ryan have no parents. They passed away from illness when they were young. Tom is like a son to Ryan. He mentioned this often. Becoming a police officer was also driven by a desire to protect. Seeing his brother, whom he cared for deeply, stray from the right path is a shock to Ryan. Perhaps even more so than if it were his own issue. While Ryan is openly angry right now, underneath it all, he simply wants his brother to live righteously. I'm sure of this because I too lost my parents young and had to look after my sister. So I deeply understand his feelings. However, Tom seems not to understand at all. Far from apologizing, he defiantly showed no remorse. Me, apologize to Nora? There's no way I can do that. A husband's position is above his wife's, and that relationship won't change. Also, stop making such a fuss over a mere affair. Big bro, don't meddle in a couple's issues. Is the husband's position really above the wife's? Aren't spouses supposed to be equals, supporting each other side by side? I was about to confront Tom but stopped when I saw his face. He was so calm despite saying such absurd things, I realized anything further would be pointless. Tom, I had no idea you were so rotten. I didn't raise you to be like this. Stop your yapping and kneel down now. Don't disappoint me further. Big bro, stop being so self-righteous. I don't remember you raising me. You were always busy with work and left me alone, didn't you? And now you interfere only when it suits you, trying to play the parent? Or maybe, if you say I'm rotten, it might be because of you? Just so you know, I got here on my own. Keep your disappointment to yourself. Tom's defiant attitude continued to escalate. Ryan could say nothing more. Although Tom was lashing out, he should feel indebted to Ryan who raised him. But Tom, knowing this, used the past to silence Ryan. Tom's smirk said it all. Hey Nora, it's because of Big Bro that I cheated, right? If you're gonna blame anyone, blame him. Also, you should be the one kneeling and apologizing, right? Sneaking around as a housewife who can't do anything, you should pay me for the trouble you've caused. If you can't, let's get a divorce. Tom's demeanor was almost like a gangster's. It looked like he might lash out at any slight resistance. But I won't be subdued by my husband. Because he's the one who's going to see hell from now on. After taking a deep breath, I suggested to Tom. I understand what you want, Tom. Let's go into my new place for now. We'll continue this conversation there. As long as you understand, that's good. By the way, cancel that new place you signed up for on your own. I can't accept you doing things behind my back. Yes, I understand. I'll make sure it's cancelled. Come on, Ryan, shall we go? Nora, I'm sorry. I let him say whatever he wanted while I was here. It's okay, Ryan. Just having you by my side is enough. When I gave a small smile, Ryan quietly nodded. He probably thought I was putting on a brave face. But it's not just bravado. In fact, there's one thing I haven't told Ryan yet. The real revenge on my husband starts here. Together with Tom and Ryan, I entered the new apartment. As soon as I opened the door, everyone except me was speechless. Inside the room, 1 woman and 10 men were seated. All the men were dressed in black suits and looked intimidating. I slowly began to speak to the frightened woman. Sorry to keep you waiting, Yvonne. Are you ready to face the consequences of stealing my husband? The truth is, Tom's affair was with my sister, Yvonne. This was the fact I hadn't yet told Ryan. Because I only recently found out that my sister was the other woman. Ryan, I apologize for not telling you sooner. The other woman is my sister. Also, this place is actually her new apartment. I lied that it was mine to lure Tom here. So that was it. But how did you know it was Yvonne? The woman's face wasn't shown in the baby monitor footage. I was reviewing the footage alone the other day when I noticed a distinctive scar on the woman's waist. It's a small scar and easy to overlook, but it was definitely the same scar that Yvonne has. I see. Not only did you have an affair, but with Nora's sister? What were you thinking? To think all this was known. I underestimated Nora. But it was Yvonne who approached me first. She said, I can't have children, but I want kids. She even suggested that Nora should have them for us. She's truly wicked, right? Isn't that so, Yvonne? At Tom's words, my sister just nodded silently. Seeing this, Tom smirked with satisfaction, but then he threw out a question. By the way, who are all these guys around Yvonne? I've never seen them before. Tom pointed at the 10 men sitting with my sister. The 10 men, pointed out by Tom, all wore displeased expressions. Then Yvonne, looking frightened, tried to intervene. Tom, don't provoke them too much. What? What's the matter, Yvonne? I'll protect you if it comes to that. As if you could protect anyone. These men are. In the next moment, all 10 men stood up and surrounded Tom. Everyone's eyes firmly fixed on Tom. At that moment, Ryan suddenly exclaimed. You guys, are you from the Herring Group's gang? Indeed. My name is Gardner. As you said, we are from the Herring Group. We've got some business with Tom and Yvonne here. As Gardner spoke, tension spread among the men around him. Gardner appeared to have the kindest face, but he seemed to be the gang's leader. Gangsters? Why are gangsters involved in our affair issue? This must be some misunderstanding, right? I don't get it. Yvonne stole money from our office. To be precise, she tricked one of our younger members into stealing it for her. When we thoroughly investigated Yvonne, we ended up at her sister, Nora. That's why we came here, for Nora's sake too. Huh? I can't see the connection at all. Why would you do anything for Nora's sake? Wait, Nora, are you actually a gangster's daughter? Was the story about your parents dying a lie? No, that's not true. My parents died in a traffic accident, which happened as they tried to save a child. That child was also orphaned and was taken in by someone. It turns out that he is now with the Herring Group. Wait, so Nora's parents are benefactors to the Herring Group's gangsters? At Tom's question, both I and all the men from the Herring Group quietly nodded. Tom looked surprised but quickly objected. Wait a minute. I get the situation, but why do the gangsters need me? Yvonne stole the money on her own. I didn't do anything. Honestly, the stolen money is a trivial matter compared to hurting my benefactor. Tom, you tried to use and discard Nora like a tool. That's like trying to throw away my family. How could I stay silent about that? Gardner's tone was calm but chilling, making the atmosphere tense. This seemed to get through to Tom as he began to tremble. Brother, aren't you going to arrest this criminal right away? If we leave him be, who knows what he'll do? Criminal, huh? The real criminal seems to be someone who deceives his wife and hurts his family without a second thought. Well, I don't mind being arrested, but before that, let me say this. Gardner slowly approached Tom. The face I thought was kind transformed into something terrifying, almost demonic. I can't stand someone like you who forgets the kindness you received, thinking only about yourself. You probably think you can live on your own, right? When I see a delusional fool like you, it disgusts me. Listen well. There won't be a next time. We're always watching you, remember that? I'm sorry. I was wrong. Please forgive me. With a cold stare that would chill anyone to the bone, Tom kept nodding his head like a broken toy. Watching this, my sister Yvonne also kept rubbing her forehead on the floor, prostrating and continuing to apologize. Afterward, I consulted a lawyer and I got a divorce from Tom. I demanded as much alimony and child support as possible. Tom, perhaps wanting to escape as soon as he could, disappeared from our hometown. Remembering Gardner's terrifying face, I can understand why Tom wanted to flee. I thought this would teach him a lesson, but it didn't. Tom didn't try to pay the alimony or child support and even started harassing me. He sent silent calls and annoying messages to my smartphone, seemingly intent on mentally breaking me down. He also left messages on my voicemail like this one. You really set me up. Just so you know, I'm not scared of any gangsters, okay? I'll make sure you suffer as much as I have. You'll see what happens when you cross me. Despite being seriously warned, Tom hadn't changed at all. I was utterly disgusted by his stupidity. The harassment continued, but I deliberately didn't block his contact. I saved all the voicemails and annoying messages and sent them to Gardner. That idiot. What he's doing to you, Nora. Don't worry, we will protect you. He needs to learn what happens when he angers us. 2 weeks later, I received over 50 missed calls on my smartphone. Mostly from Tom. When I finally decided to answer, Tom sounded desperate. Nora. Why won't you answer? Please, help me. I'm really in trouble. Is that so? Well, I'm busy, so I'm going to hang up now. Wait. Don't hang up. I need you to forgive me. Please just say you forgive me now. Right after that, I heard a dull thud over the phone, followed by Tom groaning. Judging from his condition, it seemed Tom had been caught by Gardner. The thought of what might be happening was terrifying. Come on, don't mess with me. Why do I have to go through this? Nora, I was wrong. Please forgive me. I can't trust a single word you say anymore. If you want me to believe you, pay the alimony and child support. I'll make sure you take responsibility. Okay, I got it. Thank you, Nora. It just might be a bit before I can find a job, so please wait a little. I promise I'll find something soon. No, that's not going to work. You're planning to run away, aren't you? You'll work at the store we run. Don't think you can escape. Really? What's going to happen to me? I should have just apologized from the start. When my ex-husband muttered these words of regret, I felt a slight sense of relief. Since then, I've been receiving frequent messages from him. All of them are apologies. I was wrong. I regret what I did. I will definitely take responsibility. Such words lined up one after another. Meanwhile, my sister, who stole money from the gang's office, got off by just repaying the money because she was my family, but she is being strictly monitored like my ex-husband. She too has sent messages of regret and reflection, and now she is apparently working amicably with my ex-husband at Gardner's store. Of course, I have no intention of forgiving them. They completely brought this on themselves. Especially when I think about the newborn baby, there's no way I can forgive them. I've received so many messages from both my ex-husband and sister that I thought about blocking them, but I decided to keep them unblocked. To witness the consequences of their selfish actions. If they don't change, they will definitely face a miserable end. One should never forget to be grateful. Nora, Tom really is sorry. And I wasn't much help either. I thought I raised him well, but maybe that was just my own belief. I regret not listening to him more. I was also desperate raising Yvonne, Ryan. I understand your feelings. But the ones at fault are Tom and Yvonne. You don't need to apologize. On the contrary, I'm grateful. Thank you for being on my side. As I thanked him, Ryan quietly nodded. This ordeal has been tough, but the real challenge begins now. From now on, I have to raise the baby on my own. Having been a stay-at-home mom all this time, I started by deciding on a job. Since I have twins, the difficulty might be doubled, but when I see their sleeping faces, I realize the happiness is doubled too. Thank you for being born. I naturally felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Your shabby clothes got an upgrade to high-end style thanks to the splash of fine wine, isn't that nice? The one who spilled a glass of wine on me and had the nerve to say that was, of all people, the mother of the man I'm about to marry. She's got another thing coming if she thinks this rudeness will be tolerated. Wipe that smug look off your face. My name is Patricia. I'm a 25-year-old single office worker at a mid-sized company. I find my job enjoyable and fulfilling, and my relationships with my coworkers are good. I've been considering that I'd like to continue my work even after getting married. If I have a child, I'll take maternity leave, then return to work once things calm down. I've been considering that kind of plan. Suddenly, the idea of marriage has become a tangible part of my future. Indeed, I was proposed to by my boyfriend of 2 years just recently. We spent time at a fancy restaurant with a beautiful night view, and I noticed my boyfriend, Robert, unusually silent, his eyes darting around without settling on anything. Even at the observation deck with a beautiful night view afterward, he was still suspiciously looking around, heaving sigh after sigh. Finally, I couldn't bear his unnaturalness and opened my mouth. "Are you gonna propose?" Of course, I could tell. After 2 years together, one can figure it out. At that moment, his face turned red, his mouth opening and closing without uttering a word. I worried he might faint from lack of oxygen. So I told him to take a deep breath. Then, as if he had made up his mind, he took out a ring from his pocket and proposed to me. Whoa! Remembering the situation, I let out a strange sound and held my head. I was fine at that moment because the atmosphere was pushing me, but when I sober up and return to everyday life, I can't help but feel embarrassed about my behavior and his expression at that time. I am too socially inept. I have to remember not to get carried away. Marriage is just the start, I remind myself. But whenever I let my guard down, I can't help but grin, and my colleagues call me creepy. But in my current lovesick state, I don't care about such comments. Now, when it comes to marriage, the first step is to meet each other's parents. I broke the news to my parents while having breakfast. I'm getting married. So, that's it. Oh, is that so? Was all it took for the announcement to be made. Just like that, they are finished. What considerate parents I have. Being the third child out of 4, I guess this is what I can expect. But, we did have a nice beef stew for dinner. The real issue is his family. When we announced our engagement, it seems they demanded we come over to their house right away. Whoa, should we go? I worried, but he assured me, saying, if there's any discussion to be had, we can handle it when both families meet. I was relieved, but I was also worried that they might say, you should at least come to give a proper greeting. After all, he's from a wealthy family. I only found this out recently. His dad is the CEO of a well-known corporation that everybody recognizes. When I expressed my concern and asked if everything would be all right, he didn't reassure me. He was furrowing his brows. He confessed, my family, they have their quirks. He continued, like I said before, my dad's company is quite large, founded by my great-grandfather. Yeah, you mentioned that before. My dad's pretty humble about it. He says it's not him who made the company great, but our ancestors and the employees. The real problem is my mom and older sister. Despite his pedigree, he speaks casually. I just give him a bitter smile and say, is that so? Anyway, their flaunting of their wealth is pretty bad. I mean, I went to a public school from elementary to high school, and my mom would always look down on other parents, saying something ridiculous like public schools are for poor people. Really? Well, elementary and middle school are one thing, but the high school I went to was a fairly competitive public one. I chose it because I liked it. Thankfully, my friends were good to me, and I never had any issues, but it seems there were rumors among the parents that my mom was a handful. It was pretty embarrassing. What did your mom do? Apparently, she said to the other parents at a PTA meeting, you poor commoners. Well, I'm one of those poor commoners. Suddenly I felt anxious, thinking my family might be treated as poor. He continued his story. My sister has a similar attitude and openly insists on associating only with the affluent. She even laughed when saying she had cut ties with all her school friends because none of them were rich. That's rather harsh. That's why I'd rather not meet at our house. I think they'd behave in a public place, especially when your parents are present. But I just want to warn you, I apologize in advance if my mother or sister say something inappropriate. Seeing Hiro's worried face, I reassured him by thumping my chest and saying with a smile, don't worry about it. But in reality, I was far from okay. The day of the meet and greet had arrived. The venue was a private room in an upscale restaurant that Robert had reserved. My parents looked nervous, but I was likely the most nervous one there. After all, Compared to my parents who have lived a long life, I've seldom been to such places. I had arrived at the restaurant first and was thinking that when Robert and his family promptly arrived, we were ushered into the room. There, Robert and I announced our marriage to all our family members and bowed our heads in a polite request for their blessings. In response, my parents said, "Congratulations, Robert. Please take care of Patricia," my father said. My mother added, "Congratulations to you both. Be happy." What I was most worried about was Robert's family, but his father had a gentle look on his face and seemed like a very kind person, which reassured me. "Congratulations, Patricia. Our son may be a bit raw around the edges, but we hope you will take good care of him," he said. But it didn't stop there. The trouble started with the mother-in-law I had heard about in advance. You have a plain face. Aren't you mismatched with Robert?" She bypassed the greeting and went straight into assessing me. My parents and I were taken aback. But the surprises were just beginning. Here comes the second arrow. The sister-in-law says, "I can't believe you're marrying someone so ordinary. She definitely doesn't have any fancy friends, does she? If she knew a handsome rich guy, I wish she would have introduced me." As we stood there stunned, Robert quickly tried to smooth things over by saying, well, let's enjoy the meal first," but he couldn't change the awkward atmosphere that had developed. The two who were to be my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, unlike Robert and his father who were dressed in normal suits, had full-blown hair and makeup, to say the least, flashy. Their accessories were adorned with large gemstones, making me wonder if they weren't too heavy. Their makeup was a bit too much. Not only their clothes, but their handbags, watches, and all the items they wore were high-end brand goods. What can I say? Each item is probably wonderful in its own right, but when they all come together at once, it creates a sort of traffic jam of brands and it just seems out of place. That's what I learned having these two in front of me. I initially thought we wouldn't get along, but I reconsidered. Enduring is also an important part of marriage. It's not as much as it used to be, but two strangers can't suddenly become a real family. So, get to know my partner's family little by little. Such noble thoughts of mine were completely overlooked. The arrows kept coming. "You're really plain, aren't you? Hey, what brand is that dress? Oh, this isn't particularly a brand. Seriously. I can't believe it. It's the worst having you as a sister-in-law." Getting to know my partner's family little by little. "She doesn't look like she has any money at all, does she? You don't think she's after your money, do you? I wonder if the neighbors might mistake her for a maid every time she comes over. Oh, I just can't stand the thought. Maybe you should reconsider, Robert. Find someone more high class, don't you think? A girl who can introduce me to a handsome, rich guy would be ideal in my book." "That's right, just like what your sister said. Look at that face. She looks just like some poor folk. This is just hopeless." This was like a battlefield, with arrows of insults flying everywhere. There was no way I could negotiate peace in this situation. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see the faces of our parents slowly turning sour. I could see my father's eyebrows furrowing. Robert's face was even redder than when he proposed. He must be really pissed off. But he was trying his best not to ruin the mood with his anger. Even more so than his flushed face, it was the two people in front of me whose faces were beet red. I thought we were just having some sushi and wine, but his mother and sister had nearly finished all of the expensive wine. And they were even asking for more. They were clearly drunk. "I've never heard of that company. An office worker at a place like that? That's hilarious." I wish someone would take an hour to explain to me what's so funny about it. According to Robert, his sister's current social status was housework trainee. An endangered species indeed. But why could she insult me, who's actually working? His mother was just as outrageous as always. "How much is your salary? I hope it's not less than $10,000. If your annual income is $10,000, that would be so funny. For your information, my husband's monthly income is, oh, I won't say." I wouldn't want you to have a heart attack from the shock. I could feel my blood boil as Robert tried desperately to stop his mother and sister, but they were too drunk to stop. And then, the drunken high-class mother and sister reached their limit and exploded. I've had enough. I don't need a sister like this. Call off the marriage, his sister exclaimed, holding her nearly full wine glass. His mother also raised her wine glass. You really look like some kind of poor person. This is unthinkable, simply unthinkable. I can't let my precious son marry someone like this. So, we're not allowing this marriage, she shouted. Just after I let out a surprised, eh? It was all I could manage before I heard a splashing sound. Something was dripping from my hair. Eh? It was wine. They had thrown their wine in my face. The room fell silent, except for the smell of wine spreading through the air. After a moment of silence, well, Patricia, at least your cheap clothes now look high-end after being drenched in our fine wine. You should be happy. Really now? Wasting such high-quality wine on a woman who's clearly after our son for his money. What a waste. The room was filled with their laughter. What the hell are you doing, Mom, sis? Robert, his face red with anger, slammed the table. But the two of them just kept on drinking their wine, looking unrepentant. How could you two be so rude? Apologize. His father, his face pale with anger, tried to intervene. But they just ignored him. That's when it happened. My mother, who had been silently wiping me clean, yelled, "Stop this nonsense. Apologize to my daughter." The atmosphere in the room suddenly grew heavy. After an uncomfortable silence, my father put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Let's go home, Patricia. Discuss the future with Robert later." Okay. There's no way I could stay here any longer anyway. Looking at the wine stain spreading across the floor, I was on the verge of tears, contemplating the need for compensation. Patricia, I'm sorry. I really am. My stupid mother and sister. Robert was quick to apologize, but another voice interrupted him. Get out, get out. You poor folks should just leave. It was his sister. Upon hearing her, my father, who had been holding my hand, stopped in his tracks. Then he slowly turned around. His glaring gaze startled her and she made a worried face. My father had an overwhelming presence. What's your problem, you poor people? But his sister glared back defiantly. To her, my father smirked and said, Well, consider this either a warning or advice. You probably won't believe me, but I'll say it anyway. Huh? Do you realize how much the world must hate you? What? What are you talking about? There's a bunch of nasty spirits gathering around you. I can't tell if they're ghosts or thoughts, but they're all shrouded in something very dark. What? You're talking nonsense. You really think I'd believe such nonsense? I'm not asking you to believe me. You'll probably feel more convinced when something strange happens. That's all. What, something strange? To the flustered sister, my father continued his words. I don't know if it's going to be an illness or some misfortune. But you'll see the results soon enough. Thanks to this ability of mine, I've saved many people. I've seen a lot who came crying to me because they didn't listen to my advice. I wonder how it'll turn out for you. If it had been just his words, his sister and mother probably wouldn't have believed him. They would have laughed it off. But the seriousness in my father's eyes. His heavy tone didn't allow for that. They turned pale. This is a joke, right? It's as true as the wine you've spilled. I have no reason to advise you who treated my daughter terribly, but I can't bear to see the family of a man who may become my son-in-law fall into misfortune. Pushed by that intensity, his mother and sister began to tremble. Behind the two, my father pointed and said, The woman with the perm and the brunette over there. You'd better apologize if you remember them. Ah! How do you know about them? As his mother and sister screamed in terror, we left the scene. The day after that crazy meeting, Robert came rushing to our house. He apologized and promised to cut ties with his mother and sister. This raised Robert's stock in our house. Then, a few days later, his mother and sister showed up at our house asking for forgiveness.
We're very sorry.
Of course, I was surprised to find two people asking for forgiveness on my doorstep when I got home from work. The two of them, his mother and sister, begging in front of my perplexed mother. My father, standing to the side with a stern look on his face and arms crossed. What's going on? Then my mother-in-law suddenly yells in front of me.
I got seriously sick just as you said. I felt a bit off, so I got tested and was shocked. They told me that I would have been in serious trouble if they found it any later.
His sister also chimed in.
I thought I found a great guy, but he turned out to be a marriage scammer. After you warned us of some impending misfortune, I got suspicious and hired a private investigator. I was about to fall prey to him if I hadn't listened to your advice.
Then, in harmony, the two of them apologized for their impertinence. My father was lounging around casually, looking down at the two of them. Like some kind of tough guy with a vape in his mouth. In a low voice, he told them.
You two are apologizing to the wrong person, aren't you? Shouldn't you be apologizing to someone else first? Otherwise, the evil spirits won't leave you alone and more bad luck will follow.
His sister panics. Turns around to apologize to me. I'm so sorry, Patricia. I was wrong. I've learned the hard way that money isn't everything in life. His mother also apologized her rudeness.
I'm sorry for how I treated you, especially since you are the daughter of a man with such incredible abilities. I'm convinced that you and Robert will build a wonderful family together. Your child might even inherit your father's unique skills. I fully support your marriage. Congratulations.
Well, these two are quick to change their tune. This situation. It's a bit of a bother to have people begging for forgiveness, but there's some kind of pleasure in seeing these two like this. Probably because they had treated me so badly. I was overcome with the urge to give the back of their heads a good stomp, but being the mature person I am, I resisted. And then I said,
That's enough. The past is the past, but please apologize to that fancy restaurant, okay? They had to clean up after you. Of course, I've already told them we'll pay for the damages. Robert and I are going to get married as planned, but we're done dealing with you two. That's fine, right? What?
My words must have taken them by surprise. Both of them let out a gasp.
Didn't Robert tell you? The two of you are going to be living separately from now on. Patricia, you'll be living somewhere else, right? Of course. I mean, I'll be living in a different place, but that's not what I... Huh?
Robert and his father discussed and decided that both of you would have to leave the house.
What? You didn't know? Robert was furious. He couldn't forgive terrible family like you. And his father agreed with him and decided to throw you out of the house as a way of teaching you a lesson. What are you talking about?
Oh, they really didn't know. That's right. My father-in-law kept apologizing for spoiling them. He said I am going to re-educate them by pushing them into an environment where they could only get by on the bare minimum. He also said to me I won't get them involved with any of your business going forward.
We didn't hear anything about this.
I see, they didn't know.
By the way, ladies. I saw a big fancy car parked down the street earlier. Oh, that's ours. Our driver should be waiting in it. Well, he threw your luggage out and drove off.
His mother dashed out of the gate and onto the street. There were 2 Boston bags and what looked like a letter. She hastily read the letter and collapsed on the spot.
What's going on, Mom? What does it say?
His sister snatched the letter and started to read. As she read, her eyes widened in shock.
Wait, we're supposed to live here. Where is this place? It's 3 stops away on the train. A train?
Now is not the time for silly questions. If you look at the letter, it tells you where you're supposed to live from now on. I looked up the address on my phone, and, well, it's pretty old. It's a rundown apartment, to put it mildly.
Oh, here are the keys to your new place and some money for living expenses. This is barely enough. This won't even last a day.
From my perspective, it's enough to live on for quite a few months. With that amount, I can't believe she said it wouldn't last half a day. She yelled and collapsed on the spot. But we can't have them sitting here forever. I called a cab while they were still in a daze, told the driver where to go, and sent them on their way. They were so stunned they didn't put up any resistance. They just let it happen. Just before the taxi started moving, my dad said, "You girls need to reflect on yourselves and get your lives straight. If you don't, you're gonna invite more trouble. I bet you wouldn't like getting sick or not finding boyfriends." Those words turned the two girls even paler, and they were shaking their heads vigorously. "What are you, bobbleheads?" Afterwards, it seems the two of them are half crying, screaming in their shabby apartment. They sometimes turn to my father-in-law or Robert for help, but they're told they're not welcome. Apparently, they can't get rid of their old spending habits, and the living expenses given to them vanish in no time. Well, that's to be expected. Suddenly living an average life isn't something they can handle. I wonder if the day they truly repent will ever come. His sister should get a job, she's still young. Don't look down on your part-time colleagues as commoners. As for me, I successfully registered my marriage with him. I'm not particularly fond of flashy weddings, so I just held a garden party with a few family members and friends. But seeing me dressed up in the wedding dress, my parents shed tears of joy, and even Robert complimented me, saying I looked beautiful. That's more than enough for me. We are doing well, having very few troubles in our marriage. We share same sense for money. There's nothing to worry about. And finally, we were blessed with a child. When I went back home for childbirth, I suddenly remembered something and asked my father.
"By the way, Dad, I didn't know you had a sixth sense. Are there any spirits around me?"
"I've been having severe shoulder pain lately." "Aren't spirits supposed to cling onto your left shoulder?" I got anxious. My dad laughed heartily at my question.
"What are you talking about? I don't have anything like that. Your shoulder pain is probably just due to breastfeeding. That's what your mom said. But those two turned out just as you said. That's all just coincidence. People get sick and they have trouble with their boyfriends. But the scam artists, now that's one hell of a coincidence." "Really?" But even at the meeting at the fancy restaurant, those two seemed to recognize the woman with the perm and the one with the brunette hair. They seemed to know something about them.
Unable to hold his laughter, my dad replied.
"What are you talking about? There are thousands of women with perms and the brunette out there. Then, those two must have been really disliked. They must have realized it themselves. In their minds, images of women with perms and the brunette must have filled their thoughts."
I was flabbergasted by my dad, who was laughing while holding his belly. Just as if he was baited by my dad, the baby in my arms gave an angelic smile.
"It's my house. Obey me. No matter what you say, Mom is going to live in this house."
As soon as I strongly opposed the idea of my mother-in-law living in our home, my husband, Jack, burst into anger like a raging fire and said that. I frowned and replied, "But this house was handed down to me by my parents. Why is Jack boasting that it's his house when it's mine?" However, I tried to have a decent conversation, but if Jack kept taking an authoritative attitude, thinking he could make me obey him, he raised his voice and said, "I'm the one paying the rent. So this house is mine. It's not yours." I was at a loss for words. "I'm not even having you pay for it." As I couldn't say anything, Jack thought he had one, snorted, and plopped down on the living room sofa. I let out a big sigh. My name is Amy. I currently live with my daughter, Sarah, who is going to be an 8th grader, and my husband, Jack. We live in a 2-story house, and Jack and I started living in this house about 3 years after we got married. Originally, my parents lived in this house, but they decided to give up the house and move to the countryside, saying they had something they wanted to do there. At that time, my parents decided to rent this house to us, Jack and I, who were married and had Sarah in my belly. I suppose my parents were concerned about their income even though they had moved to the countryside. Well, it was cheaper than living in an apartment or buying a new house, so Jack and I were happy to pay the rent. I work as a magazine editor and make a decent amount of money. Originally, I was an editor for a fashion magazine, but now I've been entrusted with being the editor-in-chief of other magazines. I've always enjoyed thinking about the writing and design in magazines, so this job is like a calling for me. By the way, I met my husband, Jack, through work, during a meeting. He was a photographer. His style was to shoot anything he thought was nice, be it landscapes or people, and then ask for it to be published in a magazine. Well, there aren't many times that what he shoots and what the editorial department wants to post coincide. So, I guess I earn more. In fact, he's a freelance photographer, so he's not stable in terms of income and can't be relied upon. In the midst of that, we ended up raising our daughter, Sarah. I'm busy with my work in the editorial department, but since Jack is a freelance photographer, he doesn't go out when he doesn't feel like it, and he has no work or anything. So I left our little daughter to Jack. I have a stable income, so I thought it was only natural to divide the roles like this, but there was someone who outright rejected our role division. That was Jack's mother. For me, she's my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law didn't necessarily believe in male superiority over women, but she had a personality that couldn't tolerate her own son taking care of the child or doing household chores. So when she found out that I was working outside and that Jack was taking care of the child and doing housework at home, she became furious. Why is my Jack doing all the wife's work when she's out having a break? I was surprised at that. Jack had been living at home until he married me, so my mother-in-law should have known that he was a freelance photographer and didn't have a stable income. However, it seemed that how much Jack was earning didn't matter to my mother-in-law. What mattered to her was whether her precious only son was not having a hard time.
Excuse me, I'm not just taking a break outside. I'm working hard outside every day. I'm just having Jack look after Sarah while I'm gone.
When I came home after finishing my work, my mother-in-law was standing like a statue in the doorway waiting for me, and I was really surprised. My mother-in-law's house is a 3-hour drive away, so I thought she wouldn't come so easily. But she must have been worried about her son Jack. As soon as she came to our house while I was gone, she began to lecture me immediately.
You know, even if you say you're working outside, you're married to Jack, right? You have to think of Jack first, you know? And yet you're pushing child-rearing and housework onto Jack. If this was going to happen, you shouldn't have had a child.
I inadvertently reacted to my mother-in-law's words with a huh? I somehow knew that my mother-in-law disliked me. After all, her son was the most important person to her, so she probably resented me, the bride who stole her son through marriage. Even so, I thought she would cherish her son's married life and the child born between her son and me. But it seems I was wrong about that. My mother-in-law really only cared about her son, Jack, and considered everyone else a nuisance. On top of disliking me, she started saying she didn't need my daughter, Sarah, either. Finally, she grinned and looked towards the living room where Sarah was, saying, "If you're gonna keep bothering Jack, we might have to think about sending Sarah somewhere to be adopted." I was instantly irritated by her words and told her clearly, "Please leave." My mother-in-law, already disliking me, frowned and said, "What are you saying to your husband's mother?" But I grabbed her arm and said, "Mother-in-law or not, you're an outsider to this house. Who do you think you are, telling me to give up my dear child for adoption? We won't associate with you anymore, so leave." I then took her outside, escorted her to the gate, and immediately closed the door behind me. She made a fuss in front of the house for a while, but I ignored it. During that time, Jack was doing what, you might ask? Well, since his mother came over, he left everything to her, including taking care of Sarah and the house chores, and he himself was sound asleep in bed. Well, it seems his mother must have thought, why do I have to do the wife's work? She didn't do any housework and completely neglected Sarah's care. I rushed to Sarah and made dinner for her. While Jack was still asleep, I called my father-in-law. Unlike my mother-in-law, who valued only her son and didn't listen to anyone else's opinions, my father-in-law was a reasonable person. When I told him everything about how my mother-in-law had barged into our house, lectured me absurdly, and even said to put Sarah up for adoption, he was as angry as I was and came to pick her up right away. You don't have to deal with the relatives much anymore. I'll make sure my wife stays away from this house too, said my father-in-law, grabbing his wife by the scruff of her neck, who was screaming, "Why do I have to be yelled at? This woman married Jack, didn't she? Then she should serve Jack and listen to what I say too, and put her in the car. Enough already. Do you want to make your own son good for nothing? Our grandchild was just born, and now everything is ruined because of you." My father-in-law was angry. Of course, my father-in-law wants to love his grandchild. Nevertheless, my father-in-law saying minimal interaction with relatives is fine was probably to protect me and Sarah. I can only thank my father-in-law. Then, we stopped seeing my in-laws so often, no big incidents happened, and when Sarah was in 8th grade, something happened. Shockingly, my father-in-law had passed away. He had been complaining about feeling unwell for several days, so he was on his way to the hospital when he lost consciousness. He was rushed to the hospital, but it seems luck was not on his side. Suddenly, my father-in-law's death saddened me. Of course, Jack, who lost his real father, was also sad. And even though she hadn't been interacting with the relatives, Sarah, who had continued to correspond with her grandfather in 8th grade, was very upset. Since they were pen pals, Sarah might have been sadder than me. After all, I couldn't help but think, who's going to stop my mother-in-law now? While it's sad that my father-in-law passed away, the fact that there is now no one to stop that reckless and hateful mother-in-law who dislikes both me and Sarah is very frightening. In the future, my mother-in-law might storm into our house. After all, until now, even if she tried to come to our house, my father-in-law had been strictly managing the money so she wouldn't have the travel expenses, and had even made her give up her driver's license. But now, my father-in-law's inheritance is hers, and no one around to tell her how to use that inheritance. It seemed as though my fears had come true when my mother-in-law approached us as the funeral ended and relatives gathered, declaring, "I'm going to move into your house soon." Certainly, since my father-in-law has passed away, my mother-in-law will be living alone in her house. However, even so, I absolutely cannot agree to live with my mother-in-law, who sees me and Sarah as nuisances. Especially considering that Sarah is in a sensitive period of adolescence, being in 8th grade. I'm sorry, but living together is impossible, I firmly refused, and my mother-in-law glared at me as if she were going to spit at me. Then, she put her hand on Jack's arm and said in a frail, elderly voice, "Jack, you really married a cold-hearted wife, didn't you? I want to talk to you alone." She then separated Jack from us. Next to me, Sarah let out a big sigh and said, "Grandma is really a troublesome person. Grandpa used to say that in his letters. If it's good for her, she doesn't care about those around her. That's why there's been trouble for a long time." Saying that, Sarah just shrugged her shoulders. In the past, Sarah used to be attached to Jack, who took care of her, but recently she seems to have realized that it's me who is earning money and supporting the household. She has come to favor me over her father. Well, Jack still sees Sarah as a little girl, so I guess it makes sense that they don't see eye to eye, since Sarah wants to grow up quickly. "Hey, Sarah. Mom really thinks it's impossible to live with your grandma. But what if Dad and Grandma ignore what I say and try to live together in the house?" I said, hesitating to tell her the whole story. Because what I'm about to say is a heavy topic for a middle schooler like Sarah. Considering Sarah's feelings, I also felt that making such a decision might be wrong. However, Sarah seemed more mature than I thought, and she said, "If you're going to divorce Dad, I'm definitely going with you, Mom." It seems that Sarah immediately caught on to what I was trying to say about possibly divorcing her father. Moreover, I was truly happy that Sarah said she would side with me. But having a daughter in middle school, I thought it might be better to keep the family together until Sarah graduates from college. But it seemed that Sarah had also noticed my hesitation. "You know, Mom, I think it's okay for you to leave if you can't bear it. And I can't stand Grandma either, so if staying with Dad means having Grandma around, I think divorce is the only option," Sarah said firmly, indicating her willingness to leave her father. I think the last time Sarah and my mother-in-law met was when Sarah was very small, so maybe she remembers the unpleasant attitude my mother-in-law showed her at that time? I found out for the first time that Sarah disliked my mother-in-law so much. While surprised, I thought to myself, that's right. Living with such a person would be worse for Sarah than divorcing. But Jack, who had been talking to my mother-in-law alone, seemed to have a completely different idea, and as soon as we got home from the funeral, Jack said to me, I'm going to live with Mom. But my opinion hasn't changed since the old days.
I absolutely refuse. Living with your mother, even if the world turns upside down, is unthinkable.
Even though I firmly refused to live with my mother-in-law, Jack glared at me, saying that he couldn't back down because she's his mother.
This is my house. Obey me. No matter what you say, I'm going to have Mom live in this house.
It felt more like a command to me, his wife, rather than a request to live with his mother. Maybe when he was talking to his mother alone, she told him something like make your wife obey? That would be just like her. I frowned upon hearing that and said, this is the house I inherited from my parents. Why is my husband acting like it's his house when it's mine? But, while I was trying to have a proper conversation, my husband was taking an aggressive attitude as if he could control me by doing so, raising his voice, I'm the one paying the rent. Then this house is mine. Not yours. I was speechless. Though he's not the one paying for it. While I was unable to say anything, my husband, perhaps thinking he had one, snorted and heavily sat down on the living room couch. I let out a big sigh. Why is Jack under the impression that he's the one paying the rent for this house? I thought for a bit. I'm the one paying the rent for this house. Moreover, this house is something I'm renting from my parents, and I'm the one that made the contract. In this agreement, Jack is considered an outsider. And Jack's only financial contribution every month is the savings for Sarah. As you know, Jack is a freelance photographer and doesn't have a stable income. So, I thought it would be risky to leave him in charge of things that must absolutely be paid every month, such as groceries and electric bills, and instead had told him to put money into savings for Sarah, which didn't have to be paid every month but would be better if saved. I think Jack had been putting in $300 to $500 every month into that account. Perhaps he's thinking that's the rent? Thinking this, I shook my head and said, no. There's no way he could make such a misunderstanding, I thought, but no matter how much I thought about it, the only money Jack has been paying, aside from Sarah's birthday presents and other unexpected expenses, is about that. Rent is something that has to be paid every month, so there's no way he's confusing that with the rent. What on earth is this man misunderstanding? I thought, and immediately talked to Sarah. Sarah, who had apparently been listening to Jack and me in the hallway outside the living room, shrugged her shoulders and said, it's hopeless now. I heard from Grandpa, but Dad's been spoiled rotten by Grandma, thinking everyone around him will do as he says. My father-in-law used to say something to the effect of, do you intend to make my son a good-for-nothing, when he came to our house to pick up my mother-in-law, and I finally understood what he meant. The more my mother-in-law spoiled Jack, the more Jack would become a good-for-nothing. And, as a result, this had affected us in the worst way. Divorce has been decided between Sarah and me, but that aside, my mother-in-law is going to barge into our house. In that case, other measures will be necessary. I found out the day my mother-in-law was coming from Jack and told my parents. It's only natural. The owners of this house are my parents, and currently, they are renting it out to our family, so if my mother-in-law arbitrarily says, I'm going to live here, we'll have to call the owners of the house. An hour before my mother-in-law was due to arrive, my parents arrived at the house, and Jack was in a panic, saying, "WHY are Amy's parents coming to the house?" Even though he's under the mistaken impression that he's paying the rent, he must understand that this house belongs to my parents and that I'm just borrowing it now, so that's probably why he's panicking. I've properly told my parents about what's happened, so my parents have been giving Jack stern looks from the beginning, saying, Jack, you are Amy's husband and Sarah's father. Yet, even though they both are strongly against it, you seem to be forcibly trying to have your mother live with you. And that mother is coming here today, my father said to a trembling Jack, who answered, but, Dad passed away. My father continued, so what? Just because she's alone? There are other ways if she's lonely, but you are neglecting the family you should protect and calling your mother to this house. Then we have no choice but to evict you from this house.
What? Why? This house was handed over to my daughter, not you. My daughter seems to be going to divorce you, and we won't let you and your mother live here.
Jack looked at me in surprise, but quickly snorted.
I'm the one paying the rent, how can you allow this?
But reality was different. My father sighed and said, I have been receiving the rent from my daughter every month. I've never received it from you, and Jack's eyes widened. When I said to Jack, could it be that you thought you were transferring money to my dad's account, when you were actually putting it into the account for Sarah? Jack began to hold his head on the spot, recalling his actions at the time of the transfer. It finally dawned on him that the account he'd been putting money into was not his father-in-law's, but the one he'd made for his daughter. Both my parents and I were dumbfounded by his series of actions. After a while, his mother-in-law came to our house. She arrived in high spirits, but upon seeing my parents standing like sentinels at the front door, waiting for her, she suddenly became nervous. When my parents spoke about Jack's and my divorce, the mother-in-law joyfully said, finally, Jack's free from that horrible wife, but when they explained that Jack would be kicked out right away because the house was not his, she turned pale and exclaimed, What? I sold my house. I thought we could live here. Though she said this, my father and mother adamantly refused to let her in, and eventually, she broke down crying and ran away somewhere. Jack also ran after his mother like that. While they were gone, we called a locksmith to change the locks. Now neither Jack's mother nor Jack will be able to enter the house without our knowledge. I immediately had a lawyer proceed with the divorce, and I became a single mother. Sarah also said about our divorce, it was a bold decision, but I think it was good. Dad hasn't been taking photos at all lately, and he was becoming a bum. Plus, if Grandma was added, I think my college fund would have been used. After the divorce, it seems Jack and his mother-in-law have started living in a cheap, rundown apartment. The mother-in-law, realizing that they can't live on Jack's earnings, is now working diligently at a part-time job, but someday, that life will probably collapse. Well, it's none of our business. Right now, my daughter and I are living happily together.